Orcas command respect as Earth's largest predators after the great white shark. While wild orcas rarely attack humans since we aren't part of their food chain, captivity alters their behavior dramatically. At marine parks, there have been multiple severe attacks, including 4 fatalities. However, some speculate unreported fatalities have occurred at sea when no witnesses were present. Wild orca aggression toward humans seems improbable but possible, given their massive size and power. Prudent ocean-goers should maintain a respectful distance. Here are 6 stories of orca attacks. It was the summer of 2011 on the remote Crandall Island, a tiny landmass off the coast of South Carolina. The island had been privately owned by the wealthy Henderson family for generations and served as their secluded vacation getaway. This year, 22-year-old Emily Henderson had invited her closest friends, Jessica Martin, Kyle Adams, and Greg Rodriguez, to join her family for a week of sun, surf, and relaxation away from the stresses of college life. Crandall Island was a nature lover's paradise, with dense maritime forests blanketing the interior and pristine sandy beaches ringing the perimeter. A simple wooden lodge provided rustic accommodations powered by solar panels and equipped with basic amenities. The island's crowning glory was its crystal-clear waters, teeming with vibrant marine life and coral reefs. Unknown to the vacationers, a research team conducted an ongoing study of the area's orca whale population. On their 3rd day amidst this natural splendor, the group decided to spend a lazy afternoon at the beach adjacent to the lodge. Emily's parents, Richard and Claire, opted to stay behind, exhausted from the previous day's kayaking expedition. The 4 friends lathered on sunscreen, donned swimwear, and eagerly made their way across the fine white sand. Kyle shouted that the last one in the water would be a rotten egg, before sprinting and discarding his shirt as he ran. Greg and Jessica laughed, quickly giving chase while Emily followed more relaxedly. The clear azure waves beckoned invitingly as Kyle and Greg dove headfirst into the refreshing shallows. Jessica paused at the water's edge, slipping off her sandals. She asked Emily if she was coming into the water. Emily said she would join shortly, as she needed to put her belongings down first. She placed her towel, sunglasses, and tote bag on the sand. Jessica shrugged and splashed forward, submerging herself with a gleeful shriek at the water's revitalizing chill. From the shallows, the 3 friends began exchanging jokes and playful splashes. Emily felt a sudden urge to relieve herself after neglecting to use the restroom back at the lodge. Glancing furtively, she decided the isolated stretch of beach provided sufficient privacy. Leaving her belongings behind, Emily waded deeper into the gentle waves until the salty water reached her midriff. She turned to face away from her friends, lifted her swimsuit bottom slightly, and allowed her bladder's contents to trickle freely into the ocean. Sighing with relief, Emily replaced her swimsuit correctly and began discreetly walking forward to rejoin her friends. Unbeknownst to her, a research drone operated by the marine biologists monitoring the area's orca activity had focused its cameras directly on Emily. Her bobbing, treading motions in the deeper water had triggered the drone's software to identify her as a potential seal or small marine creature. A massive orca whale, well over 30 feet long, had been patrolling a short distance away when the drone's alert sounded in the researchers' station back on shore. The considerable bull orca banked hard in the direction indicated by the drone's signal, rapidly cutting through the waves with powerful flukes. With shocking violence, the orca's immense jaws erupted from the depths directly in front of Emily, descending around her torso with a devastating chomp. Salt water and searing pain flooded Emily's senses as her body was effortlessly lifted from the ocean's surface. She barely had time for a scream before the orca's serrated teeth shredded her skin and muscle. Upon witnessing the gruesome scene, Jessica cried out for help from the shallows, splashing backward in horror. Greg and Kyle whipped their heads around, dumbfounded by the terrifying sight. Emily's legs thrashed wildly above the orca's huge, undulating body as she was inexorably dragged beneath the waves. A thick cloud of her blood rapidly bloomed across the once transparent surface. The 3 friends gaped in stunned silence as the water's relative calm returned, mere seconds after Emily's disappearance. Her belongings remained untouched on the sand, the only indication anything had happened. An anguished wail finally broke from Jessica's lips as the traumatic reality took hold. Back on the beach, the researchers monitored the drone feed and scrambled to contact local authorities while attempting to track the orca's path. Acting quickly, the Coast Guard dispatched a team to organize a larger-scale search and rescue operation. Hours later, the grim-faced squad arrived at the island to find Richard, Claire, Kyle, Greg, and Jessica huddled in shocked misery. After hearing their agonizing account of the ordeal, the officials solemnly explained the situation. The lead agent stated somberly that he was afraid this was a miserable case of mistaken identity. Based on the research team's footage, he said the orca mistook their friend for a seal due to her movements and positioning in deeper water. He made it clear this was simply hunting behavior, and that the orca did not intend to attack a human being. The lead agent's words did little to console the grief-stricken group. Richard and Claire Henderson were utterly devastated at the loss of their only child in such a horrific manner. Jessica could not shake the image of Emily's flailing legs from her mind, while Greg and Kyle felt guilty that they could do nothing to help their friend. In the days that followed, search teams scoured the surrounding waters using sonar and divers in the hopes of recovering Emily's remains to provide some closure to her family. Unfortunately, the orca had likely carried her body miles away, and the search proved futile. The remote location and unusual circumstances made it extraordinarily difficult to investigate further. A somber memorial service was held for Emily on the island, attended by her loved ones and the research team who had unwittingly triggered the tragic chain of events. Though orcas generally posed no threat to humans, the group struggled to rectify how such a devastating freak occurrence could have occurred. Once a natural paradise, Crandall Island became indelibly marred by the scars of unimaginable grief and terror beneath its pristine surface. It was 2006 in the remote, windswept Deception Islands off the Antarctic Peninsula. This lonely, ice-scoured archipelago was home to one of the world's largest breeding colonies of Antarctic fur seals, and a diversity of iconic marine wildlife like killer whales, leopard seals, and penguins. The island's isolated location made it an adventure destination for the most daring eco-tourists seeking unspoiled nature experiences. Robert and Samantha Taylor, a young couple from Seattle, had saved for years to afford this once-in-a-lifetime excursion. Both avid outdoors enthusiasts dreamed of exploring Antarctica's rugged, pristine landscapes. After an exhausting journey by plane, ship, and Zodiac raft, they arrived at the islands, ready to immerse themselves in this wild polar realm. Their second day on the expedition cruise was scheduled for a kayaking excursion through the breathtaking Predators Bay, aptly named for the abundance of top marine predators frequently sighted patrolling its waters. Robert and Samantha suited up in waterproof dry suits and life vests, giddy with excitement as they boarded a small two-person kayak provided by the tour company. Robert expressed his awe to Samantha, saying he couldn't believe they were kayaking in Antarctica. The waters of Predators Bay were remarkably calm, the surface reflecting the craggy, snow-capped mountain peaks looming in the distance. Their experienced local guide, a grizzled Antarctic veteran named Gunter, led the small group of 6 kayaks through the maze of towering glaciers calving into the bay. Gunter repeatedly warned everyone to remain vigilant, as they could potentially encounter large predators drawn to all the seal activity in the area. For the first hour, the excursion was beautifully serene, with the only sounds being the gentle splashing of the kayak paddles and the raucous barking of seals lounging on nearby ice floes. Samantha was in her element, frequently pausing to snap photographs of the jaw-dropping scenery. At one point, Robert noticed an odd slick on the water's surface ahead. He asked Gunter what that was out there. Gunter squinted, then his eyes widened with surprise as he explained it was the telltale sign of a male orca's towering dorsal fin cutting through the water. He warned everyone to hang back and not get too close. The group obediently paddled backward, maintaining a safe distance as an immense killer whale broke the surface about 200 yards away. Its massive tail flukes periodically breached, propelling it forward in a slow, methodical patrol. The beast appeared utterly unconcerned by the tiny human visitors in the bay. Samantha whispered in awe that he was an absolute unit as she fumbled for her camera to capture the moment. Moments later, Samantha let out a startled yelp as the kayak tilted hard. dumping her and Robert into the 34-degree Antarctic waters. Robert immediately gasped from the shock of the freezing temperature, while Samantha instinctively thrashed, panic setting in as she struggled to keep her head above water. Churning and kicking with all his might, Robert managed to grab hold of the overturned kayak to stabilize himself. He called Samantha to come over to him, his voice cutting through the icy air. Samantha let out a gurgling cry, waving one arm as she fought against the weight of her dry suit rapidly filling with water. She was about 15 yards from Robert, but the kayak remained frustratingly out of reach to her fumbling arms. The massive male orca suddenly took notice of the violent splashing, adjusting its course with a powerful pump of its flukes. Its small, cunning eyes locked onto Samantha's struggling form with instinctual predatory focus. Robert yelled out desperately as adrenaline warmed his body, with the 30-foot orca rapidly closing the distance to his wife. Robert watched in horror as Samantha let out an ear-piercing scream just before the killer whale's massive jaws clamped over her torso with unimaginable force. The surrounding waters instantly turned crimson as the whale easily thrashed her comparatively tiny body in its mouth like a rag doll. Robert pleaded wildly to Gunter to try and help her cling to the capsized kayak in desperation, while the other guides shouted and paddled in panicked confusion around them. The doomed Samantha suddenly went limp and deathly still in the orca's gnashing jaws. With an effortless flex of its massive muscles, the creature descended below the surface, pulling her battered body into the inky depths. Robert trailed off in a trembling whisper. He stared numbly at the rippling pool of diluted blood and sea spray where she had just been, the weight of the unthinkable nightmare threatening to pull him under. And several tense minutes passed until Gunter shakily brought his kayak alongside Robert's. He stammered, telling Robert they needed to return him to the ship. With Herculean effort, Gunter hauled Robert's limp, waterlogged form aboard his kayak. He instructed the others to follow closely behind as they paddled back to the awaiting cruise vessel with grave haste. Robert remained eerily unresponsive, his mind retreating into a protective shell of shock and disbelief as he tried to process the waking nightmare he had just witnessed. During the return journey across the deathly still waters of Predator's Bay, the enormous male orca resurfaced and casually patrolled back and forth. Its pure white underside was stained a deep crimson, as if taunting the men with the vicious finality of its bloody deed. Back aboard the expedition ship, Robert was swaddled in blankets and given a sedative by the onboard medical staff. At the same time, Gunter grimly explained the horrific events to the captain and crew. A search and rescue operation was immediately launched for Samantha's remains. Still, the experienced Antarctic sailors knew the grim reality. No human body recovered from an orca's clutches ever remained fully intact. As night fell over the Drake Passage separating the Deception Islands from the Antarctic continent, a ferocious storm began battering the ship with blinding snow and howling wind. The search was abandoned as the orca's ultimate watery grave shielded its gruesome secret beneath the impenetrable chaos of the lashing sea. Robert remained dissociative, unable to grasp that his beloved Samantha was never coming home. In the following days, the ship's chaplain attempted to provide little spiritual comfort to the devastated Robert. While he was physically unharmed, it soon became clear his mental recovery from the psychological trauma would be a long, arduous journey without any proper resolution. Samantha's family was notified, and funeral arrangements were made once they returned to port, but her mutilated remains were never located. For Robert Taylor, the icy, predator-infested waters forever known as Predator's Bay had inflicted a deep, open wound upon his psyche that would never completely heal. He had been forced to confront the harsh, indifferent reality that man was not the apex species in one of the planet's most remote primal corners. On that fateful Antarctic morning, humanity was simply reminded of its vulnerability to the savage, food-driven nature of the true masters of the oceans. It was 2012 in the sleepy coastal town of Klemtu, British Columbia. Situated in the heart of the remote First Nations territory of Kitasoo-Chizes, this isolated village was surrounded by the mighty glacial fjords and ancient rainforests of the Pacific Northwest. For centuries, the area's indigenous people had maintained a profound spiritual reverence for the region's iconic wildlife. including the orcas, or blackfish as they called them. Among the town's handful of businesses catering to adventure tourists was Oceanfire Charters, owned by brash 34-year-old Arjan Maji. Despite nearly bankrupting himself, Arjan had invested in the latest rebreather technology that allowed skilled divers to explore breathtaking underwater spaces for extended periods. His premier offering was the Orca's Lair excursion, billed as one of the world's most exhilarating and dangerous dives. A series of ancient lava tubes dating back millennia formed an expansive maze-like cave system extending from the coastline. Over time, portions had eroded to create a network of tunnels and crevices now submerged beneath the frigid Pacific waters. While mapping the eerie formations, Arjan's team discovered unmistakable signs that orcas frequently used the caves as hunting grounds, lying in wait to ambush hapless seals and sea lions. Orca skeletal remains had even been found deep inside, the macabre remnants of whales that had ventured too far and drowned after getting lost. Arjan, fueled by his adrenaline junkie mindset, was undeterred by the risks. He saw the site's predator presence and deadliness as prime draws, seizing the opportunity to market it as a swim with apex killer whales in their natural habitat experience for the most extreme thrill seekers. The costly, multi-day guided expeditions were an immediate hit with that niche adrenaline tourist crowd. On this particular summer tour, 5 clients had converged on Klemtu from around the globe, lured by the excursion's terrifying mystique. They were hotel magnate Masao Matsumoto, YouTube survivalist Annalise Harkin, Argentine poker pro Valentino Escobar, South African safari guide Errol Kotso, and Bahamian heiress Miranda da Silva. All were skilled, experienced divers seeking the ultimate bragging rights and adrenaline rush. After a thorough safety briefing by Arjan and his senior instructor Raphael Greer, the adventurers donned specialized rebreather rigs to allow them to breathe underwater for up to 6 hours. They descended into the icy depths one by one via a guide rope anchored just outside the cave's entrance. The submerged tunnel network was as awe-inspiring and foreboding as Arjan had described. Shafts of filtering sunlight from above diffracted through the azure waters, casting an otherworldly glow throughout the massive passages worn smooth by the pounding sea over epochs. Orca markings and scratches lined the lava rock surfaces in certain areas, sinister reminders of the beasts that lurked nearby. Drifting through the ethereal labyrinths, the group maintained a loose formation connected by ropes and photographed the adrenaline-pumping scenery with their underwater cameras. Every shadow seemed to harbor the shape of a skulking predator ready to strike. They knew this could likely be their final adventure, which only amplified the rush. After a breathtaking 90-minute tour of the main tunnels, Raphael led everyone toward the exit as their air supplies ran low. But as they approached the guide rope attached to the cavern entrance, the line had inexplicably vanished, severed by some unseen force. Raphael frantically shone his flashlight into the darkness in search of the guide rope, indicating to the others with hand signals that they needed to locate it quickly or turn back before their limited air was depleted. Panic began to set in as both paths led into a disorienting maze of dead ends and offshoots, with no apparent signs marking the direction of the exit. In the chaos of their desperate search attempts, the scuba tethers connecting the group members snapped apart individually. Their flashlight beams only cast an increasingly restricted illumination field, swallowed by the suffocating blackness around them. Errol thrashed violently in terror as a massive dark shape plunged towards his fragile human form from the inky murk, gulping him down whole before anyone could react. The lights from his dive rig sputtered out, disappearing into the void forever. Annalise screamed soundlessly through her mask at the horrifying sight. Suddenly, 2 gargantuan jaws, each 3 times the size of her entire body, engulfed her head in a violent burst of bubbles and blood. Her limbs flailed helplessly as she was drawn into the nightmarish orca's gaping maw. Her muffled scream abruptly silenced. Miranda and Valentino immediately knew they were hopelessly trapped, as the demon whale's hulking silhouette rose before them, daring either to run. The creature's pulsing sonar blasts seemed to penetrate their very beings, generating animal dread unlike anything their puny human brains could comprehend. Valentino kicked furiously through the crush of water, trying to flee, but was swiftly torn in two by the unstoppable jaws, his ruined torso spiraling away in a blizzard of flesh and bubbles. The last sight his eyes saw was Miranda's face contorted in abject terror, just before the whale latched onto her, gulping down her wriggling body like a grotesque walrus snapping up a seal snack. The sole miraculously undetected survivor, Masao found himself aimlessly wandering the twisting obsidian blackness, his heart thundering like a sledgehammer against his chest. Every passing second drained his tank's finite air supply and heaped more smothering dread over the hopeless certainty that a savage death loomed ahead. The underwater hell was so utterly still in that moment that not even the sounds of his panting traveled beyond the mask, silenced in his airspace. In the oppressive blackness, Masao's panic-riddled mind began conjuring terrifying imagery. The cave walls seemed to pulse inward, preparing to crush his insignificant being like a trash compactor. Alien entities skittered along, using the slits of fading illumination as camouflage. Death was closing in, and his metal-upon-metal breathing punctuated the countdown. Suddenly, a thunderous boom spread through the narcosis-distorted waters, so loud and forceful that Masao was sure his head was caving in. An impenetrable wall of blackness plowed into his path like a torpedo-fired depth charge, snarling and growling through its sonar waves at such frequencies that his bones felt like butter being agitated into a frenzy. A gleam of massive, razor-edged dentition flashed in the strobe-like path lighting as the behemoth fluked closer, seized Masao's frame in its crocodilian clutches, and cinched tighter as if attempting to implode every organ and bone inward. The relentless thrashing of the whale was met with futile kicks and swipes that must have seemed adorable to this supreme emperor of the seas. Maddening was the ocean's indifference, a vast open tract of dark, icy nothingness that couldn't be less troubled by the soul-shattering screams that fought to break from Masao's throat as the abyssal executioner dragged him into irreversible and suffocating depths. The waters consumed and strangled the sounds of his short, precious existence, burdened by the dreadful knowledge of all he had paid to face merciless, prehistoric oblivion alone in these sunless halls. Silence and inky void reigned once more in the aftermath of the killer whale's ruthlessly efficient orchestration of sheer savagery. The only evidence the human invaders had ever disturbed this remote, hallowed sanctuary were the scattered remnants, torchlit trails of bubbles, and mist of blood dispersing into the blackness. While open sea predations were always chaotic, the confined spaces of the caves had allowed the natural world's most fearsome predator to lure its prey into a dead-end gulag for one final ritualistic culling. Those brave enough to venture into the orca's lair received an unparalleled reminder that the illusion of man's dominion over nature was fragile and fleeting at best. They were at the mercy of elements ancient and indifferent, merely transient specks of flesh in a cosmos owned by unfathomably vast and powerful forces. Later, Shaken Arjan Mauji was forced to suspend the orca's lair excursions indefinitely, as news of the gruesome incident spread like wildfire. He claimed his dive company had simply underestimated the orca's territorial instincts and would implement stricter safety protocols in the future. But the Kitasu Shize's elders knew better. They held private cleansing rituals at the cave entrance, making offerings to appease the enraged spirits of the orcas and seeking atonement for allowing such disrespectful trespass upon sacred hunting grounds. The blackfish, they believed, had simply been defending their realm and reminding humankind of its insignificant place in the grand order. Although the underwater footage from the doomed dive team's cameras was eventually recovered, much remained shrouded in brooding mystery and unresolved darkness. Of the graphic visuals captured during the whale's final bloodbath, most were too chilling and indecipherable to share publicly. One thing was certain: the primitive, shadowy depths of the orca's lair, a veritable abyss devoid of light, harbored secrets zealously guarded by nature itself. Those who ventured into this treacherous domain for mere sport and spectacle quickly learned a harsh lesson. Humans are not the only apex predators on this planet. The consequences faced by these intruders served as a grim reminder of nature's indomitable will. It was 2005 when the prestigious Coastal Cup sailing race took place along the rugged shores of Baja California, Mexico. This treacherous route had gained a reputation for its challenging conditions and abundant marine life, including whales that migrated through the area. Among the competitors was the Delphinus, a sleek 50-foot yacht owned and captained by the eccentric millionaire Reginald Fortesque. Reginald had assembled a capable crew consisting of his childhood friend and first mate, Nigel Pennington, and experienced sailors like the gruff and seasoned Bo Johansen and the fresh-faced but skilled Rachel Myers. The cheerful deckhand brothers, Esteban and Julio Cortez, were rounding out the team, who provided an extra set of hands and a light-hearted presence on board. The Delphinus swiftly took the lead as the race commenced, thanks to Reginald's meticulous preparation and the crew's expertise. The waters were calm and the skies were clear, providing ideal conditions for sailing. However, as the day wore on, a dense fog rolled in, obscuring visibility and adding an eerie atmosphere to the already treacherous course. It was during this veil of mist that Rachel, on lookout duty, spotted something peculiar in the distance. At first, it appeared to be a large, dark rock protruding from the water, but as the Delphinus drew closer, the shape became more defined, a massive dorsal fin slicing through the waves. Rachel shouted that a whale spotted off the starboard side, her voice tinged with excitement and unease. Reginald and the crew rushed to the railing, peering intently into the fog. As the shape drew nearer, they realized it was a lone orca, its distinctive black and white coloration unmistakable. However, something was unsettling about this particular specimen. Its dorsal fin was an ominous, solid black, setting it apart from the typical markings of its species. Nigel, ever the voice of reason, urged caution. Perhaps they should have given it a wide berth. That beast was massive, and orcas were known to be intelligent and sometimes aggressive. But Reginald, his curiosity piqued, insisted on getting a closer look. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to observe these magnificent creatures up close. As the Delphinus drew closer to the black-finned orca, the crew couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The massive creature seemed to be tracking their movements, its dark eye fixed upon the yacht. Bo muttered, his weather-beaten face creased with concern that it had a look that wasn't natural. Despite the crew's apprehensions, Reginald pressed on, determined to capture the perfect photograph of the elusive black-finned orca. As they closed the distance, the orca suddenly changed course, heading directly towards the Delphinus. Nigel insisted to Reginald that they should back off, his voice strained with worry. But before Reginald could respond, the orca breached the surface, its massive bulk crashing against the yacht's hull with a thunderous impact that sent tremors through the entire vessel. The crew was thrown into chaos, stumbling across the deck as the Delphinus rocked violently. Reginald, his eyes wide with disbelief, stared at the orca as it circled the yacht, its black fin cutting through the water like a sinister blade. Rachel exclaimed that it was toying with them, her voice shrill with fear. As night fell, the situation grew even more precarious. The orca continued its relentless assault, ramming the Delphinus from different angles, each impact more forceful than the last. The crew fought to maintain control of the yacht, but their efforts were hampered by the darkness and the unpredictable nature of the orca's attacks. Esteban and Julio, their faces pale with terror, clung to the rigging as the Delphinus lurched violently. Esteban cried that they needed to get out as fast as possible, his voice barely audible over the roar of the waves. Ever the pragmatist, Nigel tried to rally the crew to signal for help and prepare to abandon the ship if necessary. But before they could act, a massive wave crashed over the deck, sweeping Julio overboard and into the inky black waters. Esteban screamed in anguish, his cries echoing through the night as the crew scrambled to launch a life raft. Amid the chaos, the orca breached once more, its massive bulk crashing onto the deck of the Delphinus with a sickening thud. The impact sent shockwaves through the yacht, splintering the woodwork and clattering equipment across the deck. Reginald, his usual bravado shattered, crouched in the corner of the cockpit, his eyes wide with terror. Bo and Rachel fought to regain control of the vessel, their hands raw and bleeding from the strain. As the orca thrashed on the deck, its powerful tail lashing out and shattering everything in its path, Nigel desperately attempted to distract the creature. Armed with a flare gun, he fired a bright light toward the orca's face, hoping to scare it off. For a moment, the orca stilled, its dark eye fixated on the burning flare. but then with a terrifying shriek that seemed to pierce the very souls of the crew, the massive creature lunged towards Nigel, its jaws agape and filled with razor-sharp teeth. Nigel barely had time to react before the orca's powerful jaws clamped down on his torso, the force of the bite so intense that it nearly severed him in two. Blood and viscera sprayed across the deck as the crew watched in horror, their screams drowned out by the orca's manic thrashing. Amid the carnage, Rachel rallied what remained of the crew, her face streaked with tears and blood. They had to abandon the ship and get to the life raft. With the Delphinus rapidly taking on water, the survivors scrambled to launch the life raft, their movements frantic and fueled by sheer desperation. The orca seemed to lose interest as they cast off, slipping back into the inky waters and disappearing into the darkness. The night was endless and haunting as the crew drifted aimlessly in the life raft. Esteban cradled the lifeless body of his brother, his sobs echoing across the waves. Bo and Rachel huddled together, their faces etched with shock and grief, while Reginald rocked back and forth, muttering incoherently to himself. As the sun rose, painting the horizon in hues of orange and pink, the survivors caught sight of a distant ship on the horizon. With renewed hope, they waved and shouted, desperate to attract attention. Finally, after an eternity, the ship drew near, and the battered survivors were hauled aboard to safety. But the horrors of that night would forever haunt them, a stark reminder of the raw power and unpredictability of nature, and the haunting mystery of the black-finned orca. In the aftermath, the Coastal Cup race was marred by tragic events, and the debate raged on whether the orca's behavior was an isolated incident or a sign of something more sinister stirring in the ocean's depths. For the survivors, however, the scars ran more profound than any physical wound. The memory of that fateful encounter etched into their very souls, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the respect due to the creatures that call the sea their home. It was the summer of 2018 in the remote waters off the coast of British Columbia, Canada, where the pristine beauty of the Pacific Northwest concealed a long-standing mystery. Marine biologists had flocked to these waters for years, drawn by the magnificent orca pods that called this region their home. Among them was Dr. Olivia Kendrick, a renowned researcher whose unorthodox methods had earned her the moniker the Whale Whisperer. Olivia's unique approach involved spending extended periods in the water, gently interacting with the orcas and attempting to decipher their complex vocalizations. Her groundbreaking work had garnered international attention, and a documentary crew had been granted exclusive access to capture her latest expedition. On a crisp morning, Olivia and her team set out from their research vessel, the Nautilus, to locate a familiar pod of orcas they had been studying for years. The crew, consisting of seasoned divers and videographers like Jake Murphy and Leah Patel, eagerly anticipated another day of capturing the Whale Whisperer's extraordinary interactions. The orca's distinctive calls echoed across the water's glassy surface as they approached the pod's known feeding grounds. Olivia's face lit up with excitement, and she hastily donned her diving gear, eager to reunite with her finned friends. Once in the water, Olivia began her ritualistic routine, generating a series of soft, pulsing sounds that she believed mimicked the orca's vocalizations. The pod responded to the crew's amazement, gliding gracefully towards her as if drawn by an unseen force. However, as the orcas approached, the team noticed a subtle shift in their behavior. A new, larger male had emerged, his massive dorsal fins slicing through the water like a blade. This unfamiliar orca seemed agitated, his movements more erratic and aggressive than the others. Undeterred, Olivia continued her attempts to communicate, oblivious to the growing tension within the pod. But as she drew closer, the new male orca suddenly charged toward her, his immense bulk creating a powerful wake that threatened to sweep her away. The crew watched in horror as Olivia desperately tried to evade the enraged orca, her frantic movements only seeming to provoke it further. In a terrifying display of power, the orca breached the surface, its gaping jaws narrowly missing Olivia as she dove beneath the waves. The documentary cameras captured every heart-stopping moment, the crew powerless to intervene as the battle between human and beast unfolded before their eyes. Olivia resurfaced, gasping for air, only to be met with the orca's relentless pursuit. In a final desperate attempt to communicate, Olivia unleashed a series of high-pitched vocalizations, her voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. But the orca was beyond reason, its primal instincts fueled by a perceived threat to its pod. With a speed and agility that defied its massive size, the orca struck, its mighty jaws clamping down on Olivia's fragile form. The water erupted in a crimson plume as the crew looked on in shock, their screams drowned out by the sounds of the orca's fury. The documentary footage would become a source of intense debate and controversy in the aftermath. While some lauded Olivia's dedication to her research, others questioned the ethics of her methods, arguing that she had overstepped the boundaries separating humans from the wild. For the crew, however, the trauma of witnessing Olivia's violent end would leave an indelible mark. They had been granted an unprecedented glimpse into nature's raw power and unpredictability, a harsh reminder that even the most well-intentioned efforts to bridge the divide between species could have catastrophic consequences. As the sun set over the now still waters, the orcas disappeared into the depths, their haunting calls echoing across the waves. A mournful requiem for the whale whisperer, whose life had been so tragically cut short in pursuit of understanding these magnificent creatures. It was 2015, and the treacherous waters of the Bermuda Triangle had claimed another victim, the luxury cruise liner Poseidon. Amidst the chaos of the shipwreck, one man, Jason Weller, found himself clinging to a battered life raft, his only refuge in the vast, unforgiving sea. Jason's situation grew increasingly dire as the sun lay below the horizon. The raft's feeble form was no match for the relentless waves, and the scent of blood from the wreckage had attracted a deadly entourage, a pack of hungry sharks circling menacingly in the crimson-tinged waters. Jason's heart raced as the ominous shapes closed in, their sleek forms cutting through the waves with primal grace. He could feel the weight of their predatory gazes upon him, their ancient instincts honed by eons of evolution to seek out the slightest hint of vulnerability. Just as the first shark lunged, its razor-sharp jaws gaping wide, an unexpected savior emerged from the depths. A massive orca whose distinctive black and white markings contrasted against the inky waters breached the surface with a thunderous splash. The shark pack scattered, their primal fear of the apex predator overriding their hunger for the moment. Jason watched in awe as the orca patrolled the perimeter of his fragile sanctuary, its powerful tail propelling it through the water with effortless grace. For a fleeting moment, Jason dared to hope that this leviathan of the deep had sensed his plight and chosen to protect him. But his respite was short-lived, for the orca's behavior soon became unsettling. Instead of deterring the sharks, the orca grew increasingly agitated, its movements erratic and aggressive. Jason soon realized that the creature's fury was directed not at the sharks, but at the raft that kept him afloat. A stark reminder of the trauma the orca had likely experienced at the hands of human vessels. With a terrifying display of power, the orca slammed into the raft, its massive bulk sending tremors through the flimsy structure. Jason clung on for dear life as the raft splintered and disintegrated around him, the debris providing scant refuge from the orca's relentless assault. As if sensing an opportunity, the sharks closed in again, their primal hunger overriding their fear of the orca. Jason found himself trapped in a nightmarish gauntlet, forced to fend off the snapping jaws of the sharks while dodging the orca's thunderous blows. Each passing moment was a desperate struggle for survival, with Jason's strength rapidly waning. His hands were slick with blood, the salt water searing his open wounds like liquid fire. Yet he refused to surrender, his will to live burning brighter than the fading light of day. In a final, desperate act, Jason hurled a piece of debris at the orca's massive eye, momentarily stunning the creature. Seizing the opportunity, he plunged beneath the waves, his lungs burning as he swam with every ounce of strength he could muster. Above the surface, the orca thrashed and bellowed, its fury echoing across the waves like a primal scream. Sensing the shift in the balance of power, the sharks retreated into the depths, their hunger temporarily sated. As the sun lay below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the now still waters, Jason clung to a piece of driftwood, his body battered and his spirit nearly broken. But he had survived, his echo of defiance reverberating through the vast expanse of the sea. A testament to the indomitable human spirit in the face of nature's most formidable guardians.